Welcome to the Talkhorn Book Talk. Did I say that right? I can never say it right.
Yeah, you did.
With me today, as always, is Steve Semkin of the Ice Cube Press. I am Nick Burgess, the books columnist for the Iowan Magazine. As always, we get together every few months and talk about books. You've got a couple of recommendations that we're going to start with. So what do you have for us today?
Well, surprisingly, I never end up being on a shortage of books to recommend that people might want to check out. I'm just going to tell you about a few. We had Scott Quelty in last month, and it's Brother's Blood. It's about the killings up in Cedar Falls in over 30 years ago. But since we recorded that, people have just been loving this book for all the wrong reasons, of course, because, you know, people die. But it's been pretty fascinating. But about all the people that are so involved in it. Like we did an event in Cedar Falls, and the dispatcher who got the call that morning was at the reading. And so it's surprising how many people are still out there and how many people have this living memory of this event. It's like they've been waiting for it to be released so that they could finally talk about it. This one is a good one for the end of the year. It's called Becoming Real. It's by Bob Sessions, who lives in Iowa City. I probably mentioned it before, but it was the #1 bestseller at Prairie Lights last week. I meant New York Times. No, Prairie Lights bestseller. Right. But people are into it because it gives you a real everyday account on how to integrate philosophy with your normal life. And then I did this book earlier this year. It's called Winterberries by Melinda Perrin. It's a collection of poems, and it deals with this time of year of winter and things laying down and letting your stories come back to life. So it's a real introspective poetry about the winter season.
Very nice. Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention one book, and I'd have it to wave around, but it's only available digitally. It's a short story, nonfiction by an author named Rachel Corbett. She's a native Iowan. It's called A Killing in Iowa, which continuing on the theme of death in Iowa. She goes back and is exploring. She finds this photograph of her and this man who her mother dated at one point, who in Vinton killed his next girlfriend and himself. And sort of she goes back and tries to reconstruct sort of what happened and what might have led to this. And it's like I say, it's you can only buy it through Amazon. Right. And I know how much you love Amazon, Steve.
I won't say anything.
But it's a couple bucks. It's a couple bucks, and it's one of what they call the Kindle singles. So it's a sort of shorter version,
short story type thing.
Yeah,
well, that sounds pretty cool. There's good books all over the place. That's the frightening part. That's why people should take our recommendations, right? Well, let's see. I know it's the end of the year, and everyone's going to have New Year's resolutions or holiday wishes or anything. And so these are a couple that This one is called God Laughs and Plays by David James Duncan, who he also wrote The River Why, which I'll tell you is one of the greatest books I've ever read. But this one explores just ways to look at spirituality that aren't necessarily sort of a rant against far right-wing spirituality. But in the general, it's just healthy ways to think about living your life. And then this one I was going through a bookstore and I found the other day, and he wrote another book called How to Go About Living the Second Half of Your Life. And I was sort of stopped for a second, and I thought, you know what? Maybe I'm already past the second half. I've already started that second half, but I picked this one up by him too. And it's also just, if you want to think about changing something in the next year, you have a resolution that I'm going to be more observant, or I'm going to have more patience. This is a good way to sort of trigger some ideas on how you could do that.
Great.
And finally, I don't even really want to get started on it, but I've been reading and hearing about Stephen Bloom's article in The Atlantic about Iowa. And honestly, I've been spending like almost 20 years thinking about what it means to live in the Midwest and what it means to live in Iowa. And so quickly, this is one, Native Soulmate, which came out this year, which talks about life in Iowa, and from a single guy's point of view, trying to find someone to fall in love with. But it's really not only about that at all. It has to do with what the population is like out there, and how hard would it be if you wanted to meet someone in Iowa that had gone to college, or I don't know, an educated person. And so that's much more introspective than Stephen Bloom, not to mention this whole entire massive book about the state of Iowa, chronological history from Iowa's original constitution all the way through to writing by Mary Swander, in fact. So quick, that's all the books we have for this month.
Well, great. And luckily, Mary Swander is here to join us.
I think I hear the helicopter pad is clear, right?
Her private jet.
Okay.
Yes.
It's
Mary
handy
Swander.
now.
Mary Swander, the Poet Laureate of Iowa, distinguished professor at Iowa State, author of numerous books about living in Iowa and what it means to be an Iowan. And so, welcome, Mary. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you've written in a lot of different pieces, a lot of different lengths, a lot of different styles.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about what you're working on now with the Farmscape project?
Right. Actually, I'm working on a book with Steve, which I'm delighted to work with him. Is just a great editor. And I wrote a play with my students at Iowa State called Farmscape, and it's a play based on interviews of people in the changing rural environment. And we did it as a class project, and to our great, wonderful surprise, it has been touring all around the state extensively, and now it's starting to move out of the state around the country. And we got the idea last summer with Steve to publish the play within a context of essays by people who were involved in it in some ways. So I have 10 or 12 writers who are going to give me essays soon, and the likes of Fred Kirschman from the Leopold Center at Iowa State, Anna LePay, the great food writer, Jean Logston, a great agricultural writer, and then people that have been really closely involved with the play, like some couple of students that were originally in the class, a couple of the producers who really brought interesting energies to the productions that passed on to others that others have used from then on. Some of the actors in the play, Harley McElrath was in the play from Grinnell, and so he's going to write me a piece. So it's going to be a really, really nice book, and something that people then can use for further productions that they can do on their own.
Oh, very cool. So, Steve, what attracted you to working on this project with Mary?
Well, I continually hear about Farmscape.
Right.
So I'm like, seems like we need to share it with more people.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I know it was hard. I thought it was during the Iowa City Book Festival, and we were just brainstorming some ideas on how to make it how to expand on it almost. And so I just thought if you could invite some more people to write about what it means to be out there now, that it would even mean more, because the play itself is obviously just fine. But I think sometimes if you just use that to inspire other writing, it makes it even stronger, perhaps.
I mean, it'll be, now we can look at it as a piece of literature, and it'll be a vehicle for other people to perform it, but within the context of these essays, it'll be an examination of, what are some of the issues that this play raises, and it raises just about every major issue that we've got going on the in agriculture in the Farmscape today. And so I've asked each of the authors to take a different angle and view on it. So I think it'll, we'll have a wide perspective.
Well, very cool. So what kinds of things did you learn while you guys were putting together Farmscape?
Oh, it was a huge learning experience. We had 3 months, one semester to do this project. Now I'm just like, phew, we got something together, And actually, the original class was called Writing About Environmental Issues. And I didn't have an agenda at all going into the class. I said, okay, I had 10 students in the class. I said, you come up with the topic, you come up with the interviewees, and then we'll collaborate and put this together as a group. And they did. They came up with the Changing Farmscape. They went off and each found somebody that represented a different issue. And then, instead of going to class like a regular writing workshop does, and we sit there and take out people's commas and, cross off your last stanza or whatever it is. We came together and really wrote this thing as a collaborative, endeavor. And we had it on a website, and we would paste and chop and move around and think about dramatic movements. And we met once a week for 3 hours, and we just came in there really focused. Yeah. And get about halfway through the thing, and the students, not one of them had grown up on a farm, by the way, but they were all about maybe 1 or 2 generations removed.
Sure.
They understood what they didn't. They knew what they didn't know. They understood what they didn't know. And they said, "This is really complicated and complex." And so we stopped for a few weeks and did a crash course in agricultural writing and issues. And then we got to the end of the semester, and they wanted to perform it. We had one performance scheduled. And then I realized I had to teach them how to act. So then we had a crash course in theater. So it encompassed, journalism, creative writing, interviewing, literature about the environment and about agriculture and theater. It was really a dynamic class.
Right, which, as you're explaining it to me now, I'm thinking, isn't that a lot about what agricultural life is even about?
That's right.
It's like you have to learn everything, but you also have to do everything. So it's like...
And in cooperation.
Right.
Yeah.
Cooperation, make it all work.
Yeah, within a family. And so we really were a little family. We had our little pulls and tugs and, things like that. And then some of the students, of course, graduated and moved on. A couple of them are still with me, which has really been nice. And we take the show on the road. It doesn't need professional actors. Regular people take the parts. So the students have really jumped in and helped me out a lot, and they've continued to take parts when we need them. And then people, in the town take parts. One of the producers at the Hearst Center in Cedar Falls came up with the idea of doing a celebrity show where, well-known people in the community take the parts. And that was a huge draw, and we've continued to do that, too.
Oh, very cool. Now you do a lot of teaching of writing, not just in a university setting, but outside of that.
I do.
What do you enjoy about teaching writing?
Oh, I love the interaction with the students. No matter what they are. I've taught everything from kindergarten to people in retirement homes. So I've done the whole gamut, and it's real. It's just exciting to see somebody just get turned on to writing. One of my favorite stories, I was doing artist in the school work. I did a lot of that when I was younger, and I went into a school, and I think it was a 5th grade class, and taught my class. It was pretty routine for me by then, and I was asking questions, and a little girl, sort of halfway in the middle of the room, raised her hand and answered, and the whole class took a gasp, and they turned around, and they looked at her and they looked at me, and I didn't know what's going on. And, I just continued, and then after class, the teacher said, do you realize what happened in this class? And she said that student, she's in 5th grade, and she had never spoken in class ever before in her 5 years in school. That was the first time she had said anything. So there were moments like that, and it continued to be in all classes that, make it worthwhile. And then on the other end of the scale, and now at Iowa State I have these incredibly talented graduate students, and we're watching them now publish books and, have successes and short stories and poems and articles and get good jobs. And so that, you sit there and think, oh, all right, at least I help somebody along their way in a career path.
Cool. Yeah, I don't have as much teaching experience as you by any means, but I've done talks where you go to a room and they all want to be writers. Right. I'm always sort of talk to them at first because they just want to jump to the end and get published right away.
Right.
And I'll pause and say, well, how many of you experienced the writing, the thrill of getting captured or enraptured with what you're actually writing? And then sometimes only a few people will raise their hands, and I'm just like, wait a second. Yeah. Just being able to inspire students like that 5th grader to actually experience that moment of writing is probably one of the most rewarding things you can do.
It really is.
think.
You know, there's a cliche phrase, "in the flow," or
Right.
you
Like
know,
get carried away or in the
yeah,
flow or-
yeah,
right.
where you know you're really having that little high that you get from
Right.
any art form, and that's a good. You know, that's just really
Right.
rewarding to see people get in that state.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, very cool. So how do you approach writing? We were talking a little bit before that you used to write everything out on notepads, and now you
Right.
don't. How do you approach writing as somebody who does a lot of different forms and,
Right.
and a lot of different venues and that sort of thing?
Right. I was reminiscing about my shelf of notebooks. I thought I was pretty anal. I kept all my rough drafts and they all had to be the same size, and I had them all dated and everything. I'm like, oh geez. And now I don't want anybody to see them, but they are still a great record. And now I'm a little, I'm a little miffed that I write on computer and all those drafts are gone. But you know, that's the change that we've made. And now my anal system is, files on the computer and everything, and Dropbox. Oh, I love Dropbox. You know, there are inventions that have been really, really improvements in the writer's life, because you can access that anywhere. But I do think about like those rough drafts of, say, Elizabeth Bishop that are available, and you know, I've studied those and watched her process and her editing and how her first drafts started out, and where, you know, sometimes she would work on a poem there's some poems she worked on for 10 years, and she was the most careful poet that I can think of in the contemporary scene, and that process that she left behind is very valuable. So, you know, all those things are vanishing. On the other hand, I think I've been a lot more productive since we've had technology, because we talked about before the show, I used to obsessively, you know, copy by hand over and over and over with poems to get it right, change one word, and I'd copy the whole thing over. The good side of it was I'd listen to the rhythm, I'd read it out loud, listen to the cadences, the alliteration, the assonance, so forth. And the downside was it would take me days before I was ready to type the piece. So it's a trade-off.
Kind of sounds, yeah. I'm thinking, hopefully there's not a bunch of people out there that are thinking, there's good sides and bad sides. One is like, maybe everyone thinks now suddenly it's just done.
Yeah, right. You sit down and then snap.
It's like you're not doing very well if you're not, because you don't think about all the rough drafts.
Oh, yeah, I know. I know. And
archives of
people
boxes,
ask me,
right?
you know, now as poet laureate to write things for various occasions, and like, well, you can have that by Monday, can't you? You know, we expect everybody to answer our phone calls and answer our emails, spontaneously, and then things are supposed to be written, you know.
Right, just like that.
Boom,
Come on,
you know.
you're the poet laureate. You should be able to get something out.
Like,
That's what we picked you for. Fastest poet around.
Fastest poet in the West.
Is that how they decide who the poet laureate is?
They do. Who can write? Who can, you know, crank
Line
this
them
out
all up,
fast?
have stopwatches on.
He's on the committee.
And we
so
give
he
them a
should know.
choice of a subject, and we're like, all right. Doesn't matter what they write. The first one done.
It's like high
Drop
school
your
debaters,
pencil.
and then it's good.
Right. It's not really like that at all. Maybe we'll start that though.
I think you should. I think you could have two poet laureates. You could have the speed poet laureate.
Right.
Yeah, it's like speed chess.
I would never win the.
I like the Scrabble games. You have the Scrabble
so
boxes.
how do you make sure that you still get that rhythm? I mean, if sort of going over it naturally isn't there as part of what you're doing anymore, how do you still?
I do try to slow myself down often and say, wait a minute, you know, if I got this right, say it out loud, I'll go double space, triple space, and then scan it. You know, I'll do things like that to try to make up for my old method. And I used to do everything in pencil in the old days too, so that I would just, you know, I could just eraser it out, you know, or it didn't seem permanent to me that this was just a draft. And so it's a little scary to see it on the computer where you can go, oh, let's put this in a fancy font and print it. You know?
Kidding.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, as somebody who writes, you know, both poetry and prose and drama and all these different, when you sit down to write, do you have a specific, I'm going to write a poem, I'm going to write a prose essay?
Usually, when I get the idea, I think, how would that work in terms of genre? And usually then, those two things wed pretty quickly. Sometimes, they'll move around a little bit. So I've written the same thing in a radio commentary that I'll then do as a poem later. Or not the same exact words, but maybe the same incident or something like that. Yeah. So I don't know. It just always occurs to me, well, that would be great on the stage, but it would make a lousy poem, or vice versa. Yeah.
Sure. So it just sort of comes naturally. You think it weds well with sort of the subject matter often?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's like the inherent drama of the piece, however it's going to be. And poetry has its drama, and nonfiction has its drama, and that's kind of how I think of a piece. I think of when I'm trying to shape it, how can we present this so that the drama will be enhanced and it'll pull the audience in, you get the reader hooked immediately on that level, and then you start thinking on other levels, like, what's the deeper meaning of this, and how can I bring out the resonances of what I'm writing about. But you got to have that hook there somewhere or another in everything that you write. Or, look at all the books we have in the world. People have so many choices now that you really have to be better writers than we used to be. You can't just mess around. And, now I'll go back and I'll look at things that are great pieces of literature, and I'll think, people wouldn't put up with that anymore. That first chapter of this really should have been cut. We're all editors now.
Right. I mean, more people are telling stories, but someone asks, what's the future of publishing? I always say the future of publishing is fine because people love hearing stories. Right. Just because there's more ways to get them out doesn't mean that, there's still a lot of good stories, but the trick is still to find them. And then enduring stories are the ones that people are still going to want to read, and people are never going to tire of whether they read it in an ebook or if they read it on, I don't know, whatever comes next. They're still going to be attracted to stories. And so I would say publishing is going to go on forever. Yeah. It's not dying. It's just there's more to choose from.
On our first show, you were vehemently opposed to digital books and ebooks.
I know.
And
I've grown up.
I've sensed a change in you, Steve. Do you wanna, so where does that change come from you? Why are you now at peace with digital publishing?
Well,
or are you?
I'm not going to say that I'm at peace with it, but I do see the need for it. And I think I saw it more as a form that I didn't think had a lasting tradition to it. And that's sort of, and I was blind, yes, I was blind, to what it really meant. It's like I used to not like to sell books at big bookstores, and then it dawned on me, wait a second, who am I to decide who buys books, where they buy books? And I think it was Scott, in fact, I gave him my rant about, you could just pick up the book and read it, you don't need an ebook. And he goes, well, Steve, I like books too, but what I like more is I like reading books. And so really it was just that one sentence by him. I was like, you're right. Who am I to decide how a person reads their book and how they don't? All we really want them to do is read. And so I decided that's just another option for people to use. And I don't know if I've seen the light, but I've seen the value of it for those people that like reading like that. I mean, I still think they're missing out on the feel of the paper and the privacy of finding a book somewhere and not being dependent on electricity and not having it traced back. I'm a real fatalist on these things. I'm sure that they can figure out where you're reading, what you're reading, how you're reading it. But I just like the idea of the book and all the tradition that goes into page layout and margins where you have, and publishers put thought into how they lay out a book, and the margin has always been there as a way to put your hand so it wouldn't get in the way. And I think with the e-readers, I still don't own one, but I'm not that enlightened yet. But I don't know that the page breaks happen where you want, and I don't know if you have control over the type style and stuff like that. But anyhow, I'm getting there.
Yeah. Now, Mary, you seem to be sort of somebody who would be for sort of like the democratization of writing, and that people being able to express themselves in the written word easily being important. Do you see ebooks playing a role in that at all?
Yeah, I think they fulfill a niche, and I see both sides of it, but they're a way to get, for authors, they're a way, to get their work out there that, the authors have experienced roadblocks in different ways and haven't been able to, I've seen great writers haven't been able to publish a book because it's about a subject that the publishers don't think that we'll be able to sell, blah, 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 and there are different reasons for that. It was a beautifully written book. And so it provides a venue for that. On the other hand, I've also seen things that I thought should have waited, and been copy edited and, had some reviews, on them. But that's what's going to happen when we have a venue like that. So
it's not fair, publishers are supposed to be in charge of everything. It's just not fair.
we love our
Those
publishers.
people think they can skip. What's their problem?
Well, sure. Well, Mary, I did want to thank you for coming and joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been great having you.
Until next time, keep your pages turning and your books well marked. Thanks for being here, Mary.
Thank you.
Great.
It was great. Thanks, Nick.